So we have an agenda in front of us, which I have buried somewhere. There are no citizens' concerns that are on the agenda, but is there anyone who has anything that we won't be discussing this evening? All right, that's good. So the first item is report by myself on a conference call with DESI and DOR about a week ago. I talked to them for probably 45 minutes, and they had nothing good to say about our problem. And I think after that, they both in turn talked to our attorney, and maybe he can give you the information that he's garnered from them. Sorry to put you on the spot, but.
Okay, so essentially what I learned, and I think a number of us have heard the same basic thing, is that there appears to be potentially up to about $1 million shortfall for next year's budget. It looks like last year's budget was somewhere in the neighborhood of $640,000 in deficit as well. So what's happening, it appears, is it's kind of compounding over time. So they indicated that you'd have to take very drastic action to try and address the situation. And in my experience, and I agree with the DOR, that you'd have to take, in order to come up with that type of money in the budget you have, because your overall budget is about 14 million or so. So if you need to cut $1 million, you'd have to take extremely drastic action, which would be things like closing schools, staff layoffs. Usually the budget's about staff costs, and the rest of it are things like electricity, insurance, and all those things. So they also looked at your cash flow, and it appears that you have some issues with cash flow, in particular at the end of the year. You have the RAND due, and they're concerned about that. So I believe that the state will be looking more carefully at whether they'd come in to, you'd have an oversight board basically, and they would oversee the district until you get back on your feet. That's one potential. I think the other potential is that you would have to, as a committee, start determining as early as tonight what you're going to do to try and reduce the shortfall. But I guess the takeaway here is they have some really serious concerns about your budget. So.
Could I clarify something?
Sure.
So our operating loss, according to the audit, last year was $358,000, and then if you add the school lunch debt, you get to the $600. But the school lunch debt is not a 1 year deficit.
Yes, it's been accumulating. Yes.
So in the prior year, the $358,000 deficit was the sum of overspending and getting revenue less than we expected. So it was 190,000 roughly in revenue shortfall, and then 170,000 roughly in expenditures.
Yeah, what they indicated is that what's happening is this year it's overspent again. So you were in deficit last year, and then you overspent a number of the line items this year, and so now you're ending this year with an even bigger problem. So it's got to be corrected, whether the state comes in and helps you do it, or whether you try to do it on your own. My guess is the state's may have to come in because of your revenue issue, your cash flow issue. So that's kind of the status of where you're at right now.
When you say 358,000 prior year, are you talking about FY17?
Correct.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
So I believe that was
17 or 16?
17.
17 is
17.
the last audit we had.
Yeah.
And then for FY18, you said it's 640?
No.
That was still FY17. So
that
as
was
David
still
said, it's
FY.
really, that was the combination of budget shortfall, including the cafeteria revolving account shortfall.
So what was the figure on that?
I believe she said it was about 640.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that was what I had heard.
So if you take the document that says statement of expenditures, and the bottom right figure is 358,466.
David, slow down. Everybody's looking for their
Wait.
papers.
Okay. Well, absolutely, I'm sorry. So I believe that members were given a piece of paper that says statement of revenues and other sources and expenditures and other uses, budget and actual. And in the far right column at the bottom, it's minus 358,466. It says unaudited. This was produced by the auditors who are doing our prior year audit currently. So the first section under the bold heading is revenues. And if you cut to the chase in the right-hand column, 189,362 in brackets, that's a loss. It's 189,362 that we said we were going to get in revenues, and we have theoretically balanced budget. We did not get it. We also used that same number as our beginning balance on the expenditure side. We exceeded the expenditures that were overstated by $169,104, and we underperformed on revenue. You add those two things together to get the 358. Now the 350. Now, if you turn to the balance sheet supplied.
Before we move off this page, can I just ask a question? It says unaudited at the top of this paper.
Right.
So whose numbers are these? Where'd they come from?
These are
Auditors.
from our auditor.
So even though it says unaudited, the numbers are from the auditor. That's
They are.
confusing.
Well, I believe that this is, they took our numbers, okay, and compiled this. They have not done the testing yet to be able to say this has been audited. They don't go look at every transaction, but they have to do testing, so they have more
these
field
are
work.
district provided numbers, not auditor checked numbers.
Correct. Unofficial audit. Yeah, unofficial audit.
I'm finding that I can't put a whole lot of weight on this because of what we've done in the past here. And I was hoping we would have audited numbers so that we can hang our hat on those figures. These,
Well,
I feel as though I can't really
Well,
hang my hat on.
what I would say is the DOR is fairly comfortable that you have at least this much of a problem, if not worse. So they're not thinking, oh, we're going to find something and it's better than what it looks like here. If anything, it could be potentially worse.
That's what we're afraid of.
That's kind of where I'm coming from too. I mean, it's
So as David,
a true picture.
as David said, what's happening is your revenues, in particular because tuitions went down and to a much lesser extent school choice, and the fact that some lines were overspent, that combination is, not good. The other thing they're noting is because your budget only went up 10,000 this year, your built-in expenses.
There are people talking behind us that make it difficult to hear
I would just,
our lawyers speak.
I would just ask everybody to be a little more polite and let the people speak so that we can continue our business. Thank you.
So naturally, because of steps, health insurance, all those other built-in costs, if you only raise your budget by $10,000, you can't cover the costs that you automatically have, even if you didn't give raises at all. You would have expenses that would far exceed $10,000. So their other concern is that your budget's not going enough to even head off some of this. So it's really those three things that have caused the problem for the coming year, to the extent that state rarely takes over public schools, and in this case, it's possible that may have to be the outcome.
Pat, could I describe?
Yes.
So, receivership is not what we're looking down the gun barrel of here. That's a worst case, and it comes after a school has been put under a financial review board, which comes along with a loan. And so we have at the end of the prior fiscal year that we've lost 600,000,
640, I think she was saying, but it's
all right.
a little over 600.
I provided the school committee expenditure report that I got from accounts payable today, and unfortunately, I printed it. I should have printed it landscape, and you're missing 3 columns. But this document says that we're $140,000 in the red, and encumbrances have been entered. So I have some confidence in this. But the other place I'm nervous is we have other silos of tuition and school choice revolving, transportation, we know about school lunch. As far as the auditors are concerned, school lunch this year has lost $40,000. I believe that much, if not all of that, is due to timing. We're very good at booking our expenses and paying our employees, and the revenues sometimes don't get booked as quickly. But we may have a school lunch debt as well. So my sense is that we're nearly $900,000 in the hole. We can do one of 2 things. We can try and manage this ourselves, but we know we have a $1.2 million cash flow loan due, and if we're able to pay it, it's going to wipe us out, and we're going to fail to meet payroll. If we fail to meet payroll, if we fail to repay a loan within the grace period, we'll be in default, we'll be in serious trouble, and the state will come in, impose a finance review board, and we can borrow money from the state for up to 10 years, but it is a loan. And that means we're going to have to, we have a revenue problem, among other things, and we're going to have to devote future revenue to paying for yesterday.
It also comes with some rules and regulations when they give us that.
That finance review board is basically has veto power, and so they have they can say no to the pending collective bargaining agreement. If after a school district has been in the financial review position and cannot resolve itself, that's when receiver comes in. That's full-fledged dictator. I mean, the school committee will lose a lot of power under a financial review board, but if we then were to fail, we would get the receiver.
Sharon?
I have a pretty simple question. Did you appoint David as the new superintendent here?
No, I didn't.
I mean, I need to hear from the superintendent or the assistant superintendent. He may be right, but he is not our superintendent. He may know a lot of things, but he is not our superintendent, and I don't want to hear from him with his directions anymore. I want to hear from the person we're paying to be our leader.
I, for one, would like to see every member of this school committee get their arms around this budget. I do not have the confidence and understanding of this budget that I do of my town's budget, and I'm working on it. And every one of us needs to understand the budget.
Jeannie, your hand was up.
Well, should have done that months ago.
Please.
It was disgraceful 2 months ago, and it's now, what is it? Abysmal. It's pathetic. I cannot believe that you've allowed this to happen.
Can I read this?
No.
I was notified this afternoon at work about 4 o'clock that Ruth would not be coming. She, I'll grab it. How's that? I was notified about 4 o'clock this afternoon at work that Ruth would not be attending. She had spoken to her doctor, and he recommended that she not come. So that's all I can say. I had no control over when you have a doctor that tells you you can't do it, you can't do it. Jeannie?
I guess I didn't feel like I was given directives from David. I felt like David was giving us facts of what the situation is.
That's one person.
Excuse me, were you called for? I wasn't under the assumption he was giving us directives. I felt like he was just explaining what the situation was, and that we would not being told what we should do or what we shouldn't do.
I believe Tanya might be here somewhere. Yes, no? Our treasurer?
Someone back there.
I don't see her. Come on down, maybe you can help us understand this.
Well, in the meantime, I will say that what David is stating for the numbers is what I've heard as well from the DOR. So,
Yeah.
I mean, it's approximately 900 to $1 million is what they're projecting as a problem for next year. So I heard the exact same thing. It's not, but whether it's 600 or $1 million, the bottom line is you have a big problem that has to be addressed immediately in order for you to continue as a district as you know it right now.
In all fairness, Tanya knows an extreme amount of knowledge. She's only been here a few months. She works 1 day a week and has been asked to produce multiple documents. And I just want you all to know that.
Thanks, yeah.
But we need a scapegoat.
You guys want me to answer?
Okay. What would people like to know from Tanya?
Mind you, I am the treasurer. I'm not the business manager. I have been trying to assist Ruth kind of wrap our heads around what's going on. And I've spoke with council. I've also spoke with David. As some of you know, I was a prior town accountant, so I have quite a bit past municipal experience. And the long and the short of this is there has been overspending. There needs to be due diligence by the people that are in charge of the budget, the principals, the grounds people, those people that own that budget, and I don't know that that's been done. That's my professional opinion, but that has to come from the superintendent and the business manager. So that line of command needs to be upheld to make a cohesive budget work. Like Russell said, though, you know, that when the income comes in, it's based on students that are here at the school. So we can have a $14 million budget that's based on X number of children, but when we get 50 less children because kids continue to move out of the district or school choice out, our revenues then go down, but we're still spending at that expenditure level that was budgeted. So that's why these deficits happen, because the teachers and the principals have a budget and they're spending that budget, but we're not getting the funding from the state because our numbers are lower. And that's where most of this deficit continues to come from. Yes.
How do we know or predict how many students that we are going to have enrolled?
Most schools
in
have
order to determine those numbers.
Most schools have a registrar that's in charge of that, and it's something that's monitored quarterly or at least biannually, so that the schools have a better knowledge come mid-year where they are with their budgets, and the business manager can manage that budget for the rest of the year, having conversations with the people that are in charge of the budgets, and those things I just don't think have been being done.
So we do not have a registrar.
No. So we can estimate the number of kids that come in, and also, you know, the governor's budget's not always final when we do our budget, so there is some fluctuation in the Chapter 70 budget also that takes part in the revenues being different than what we might expect.
I believe in the past that knowledge of how many children will be or won't be into a grade, or how many will be entering or exiting us, has been done by the business manager, superintendents that we had in the past.
When kids come and go during the year too,
Exactly.
And then you add to that special ed kids that might come in and out, and that, you know, puts a extra expenditure on the school as well. So numbers fluctuating through the year do give some unknowns in the budget. And part of that is you have to cushion and be conservative in your budget for those things. And I don't know that that's been done either, because I have not been part of the budget process here. Like I said, Gail said I've been here since January, just as the treasurer. But one of the things I do have to say is, in the current fiscal year, we've basically been running at a break-even standpoint from cash flow. Right now where we sit, what we've actually brought in versus what we've spent, we should have excess, but that gets taken up by this revenue anticipation note that we pull every year to fund until we get our assessments in. So that is something that continues to turn over at the beginning of the year also.
Can you give us a little more detail about that so that everybody kind of follows how those things interrelate?
How the RAN and the cash flow.
So cash flow comes from?
No. So cash flow essentially is the timing of when your cash comes in versus when your expenditures actually need to go out. So currently the assessment schedule, and I should know this off the top of my head, I just looked at it, but you know, January, April, June, and I believe the first one comes to us we've got August and November too at the beginning of the year. And I've actually made this recommendation to Ruth as well as Gail that we may need to look at changing our regional agreement so that the assessments come in starting in July and pushing those other ones a month back to eliminate having to pull a revenue anticipation note and making our cash flow better.
We're taking a payday loan is what you're telling me.
Right, and it's typical. A lot of towns actually do it for tax purposes, but it seems to be like it's getting harder to pay that back because we're having these revenue shortfalls. So at the end of the year, we're taking a payday loan on a check that isn't the amount that we took the loan on. The revenues are hard to anticipate, like I said, just because you don't know your students 100%. But essentially it is a cash flow loan that we're taking. But right now, where we stand, we will be pretty close to break even at the end of this fiscal year from a cash flow standpoint. But that leaves us turning around and pulling the RAN within the first 2 weeks of the fiscal year to cover payroll and warrants until assessments come in August.
So the way that it's been functioning is no longer functioning?
I can't answer to that. I haven't been here long enough, but it should function that way. And essentially what I would like to see happen is that RAN continue to decrease until it can go away. And like I said, my recommendation to make that happen is to change the schedule of when the assessments come from the towns.
Is RAN an acronym?
Revenue anticipation note.
Okay. And that's the payday loan?
If you want to call it that, yes.
Have we moved on to discussion of options? Or are we just still discussing the report? Are we ready to move on?
I would think maybe.
Okay.
David?
While we have Tanya, I'd like to have her walk us through the cash flow she prepared.
I do have that, and I apologize I didn't get that back to you with, this was just kind of something I've been doing on my own as the treasurer. I manage what needs to be paid, when monies are coming in, and I've been trying to assess and make sure that we are able to pay off our revenue anticipation note as of June 30th. And April is closed out, so you'll notice those are highlighted. Those balances are what were in the bank accounts at the end of April. It carries forward to May, which May is where we are currently with monies that we've received, monies we've actually spent in our May warrant and payrolls, along with any future anticipated revenues that will come in the month of May. June is a clear estimate based on prior years incomes that have come in, talking with the accounts payable clerk and trying to wrap my head around that. I haven't been here a full year, so understanding when all these revenues come in, you know, I'm still trying to wrap my head around that. But right now, if we get essentially what's on this sheet, we would need $14,000 at the end of the year to cover the RAM on June 30th. I expect that we will have those in excess revenues from different grants and stuff, but those change every year, so the numbers on here are based on last year, as well as your payroll, which is significantly higher than last year after the layoff. So I presume that that number will actually be slightly in the positive come June 30th. The information below it that says PR 1 and 2, that's our first 2 payrolls of the year, which is July. The warrant cleanup, essentially, there's always a warrant that has to be processed in July to pay for prior fiscal year bills that you don't get the invoices for. That has to be done by July 15th of the following year. That 150 is based on a 141 warrant from last year. So my anticipated need for our RAN this year is less than the 1,000,002 coming in at 959. You round it to $1 million. So that's just kind of, I wanted the school committee to know where, we will be.
That's great.
I've not ever been involved in actually the processing of a revenue anticipation note through the financial, whatever, I don't know who I talked to even. I've asked Ruth for that information so that I can be in contact with her. I don't know how fast of a turnaround that happens, but essentially we would need that to happen in 2 weeks after the fiscal year closes to meet our payroll obligations at the beginning of the fiscal year.
We have a hand in the back.
Yes.
Hi, Michelle Caruso, Finance Committee from Leiden. Tanya, I just want to thank you. This is more information than I've heard in years.
Yes.
My face is probably like 10 colors
but that's good. It's good on you.
It's the
For
hot.
someone
It
who's
is,
been
it's on here.
coming to a lot of meetings where we never get answers on the budget, I wish you were here 9 months ago, 10 months ago. You're doing
Thank
an
you.
excellent job. I know you're a little scared.
It's okay.
But
I don't do well in crowds, but that's okay.
we weren't getting the answers that we asked for.
Well, and like I said, I don't have a complete full understanding.
And we don't hold you accountable.
I did work with the auditors and try to, dive in as much as I could in the time that I'm here during the day.
But I just heard something that you said.
Yes.
We had a lot of layoffs.
Yes.
And now the salary budget is higher than ever before. How is this happening? And
That
how come the
can't
school
answer.
committee did not know this? This is basic.
I can't speak specifically to the salaries budget because, like I said, I wasn't part of the budget process, but I do know that part of the overspending issue in prior years has been the substitute line not being funded enough to cover substitutes, and also there's step increases and raises that I think are in your guys' contract that I don't fully understand. All
So
of
they
that
weren't
with salaries.
budgeted for all these increases?
I'm not saying that the increases weren't, I don't know how that played out, but I do know just from working with the auditor and stuff and working with Ruth and other financial staff that the substitute line was an issue in the past couple of years and hadn't been budgeted, so I think they're trying to get those revenue or salary lines where they really need to be for the budget.
Thank you.
But I would have to do more
Thank you.
research because I really don't know.
Thank you, because it's like the first time that we're getting.
I will say that salaries was where most of the budget was overspent in FY17, so I think they're trying to get a handle on that.
Thank you.
So our next agenda item.
There is a hand in the back.
I can't see hands in the
It's
back,
Nolan.
so. Okay, Nolan?
I have 2 questions. That one is about something you just said. You said, I believe, that our cash flow for this year is at a break-even point.
We should be.
Which in my understanding is what came in this year is matching what's going out. So
to an extent, yes.
Well, it's either break-even or we're in the red or we're in the black, right?
Yes.
So that makes me think that we have some issues in the past few years that somehow are a surprise, which I don't understand that because we are audited regularly. So, however, if this year is a break even, that's something for us to know. Like that's a specific thing. And my other question is about, I believe through the last year or two, that the way the spreadsheets were done and the way budget lines were done, and someone please correct me, but I think, wasn't the insurance and other costs associated with salaries put into salary? So that may make it look like we had a lot of layoffs and our salaries went up, when in fact we've combined health insurance and salaries to now make salaries. Is that possible, that that's what's happened?
That may be. I wasn't part of the budget process, so I can't answer that.
No, it didn't.
Is that?
It's got to be, because the final payroll in each month spikes, like almost doubles. That says to me that health insurance is in there. And then the other thing that I learned in the last day is that we are self-insured for unemployment. So last year when we laid off 11 people, each one of those people could collect for 30 weeks, if they didn't find another job, at 50% of their pay. That's about $10,000 for a para, and about $20,000 that we should have been budgeting out of pocket. We don't pay an insurance premium that gets adjusted based on our loss history. We are called self-insured. So if you recall the document I created that says, we need to cut this much, a teacher cut will result in this, or a para cut, add 10,000 to the para, add 20,000. So this explains some of our losses. I think that UE payment is also end of the month in there. I don't know that. I'm speculating.
What is UE?
Unemployment insurance.
Okay.
So I just think that I understand that there was I believe, this is what I heard at school committee meetings, that the point of moving in the budget spreadsheet, the point of moving the health insurance into the salary line was to make it easier to see what it costs to employ someone. I get that, but it's very easy to put a subheading and include all the related costs in a spreadsheet. So I think it's wrong to do it the way it's happening, because it's now, what it's doing is it's putting as if the teacher salaries are, wow, they're way out of whack. And if you look at the last 9 years, the increases are so low in our district for faculty. And this is inappropriately making it look like this is happening. And what's happening is this is going into the papers this way. The teachers are getting a bad rap in this whole thing, and I'm not even blaming anybody. Here we have a year that is potentially a break-even year, and yet still we're saying, well, our salaries are way out of whack. It's poorly documented, and clearly the money that's owed has to be squared away. But I think we need to change the way that we are sharing information outside of this room, because it's affecting our schools, and that's not good for any of us.
Can I just clarify real quick? The cash flow pertains to not just the general fund, but all the subsequent funds, your grant funds and everything else that are funds within themselves. So there are funds that are coming in through the end of the year that are essentially non-general fund cash, but that's what a cash flow is. Money's in and money's we know we have to pay out. And this is all encompassing of all our funds, so that does not mean that the general fund is at a break even. The general fund can very clearly be at a deficit, while some of this cash pertains to other grant funds that are self-funding, just like the school lunch and all those other funds.
You can, school committee member can speak before me.
I didn't see her.
Okay, I was just going to speak to, I know that in not the fiscal year 18, but in the fiscal year 17, a number of teacher salaries that had been isolated into sort of singular lines, or had been put into lines where they didn't really belong, had been consolidated back into the general salary line, and I think that also should be noted. So that general salary line went up across all of the schools in the district during the 2017 budget, because there were teachers that were on a separate line under a different heading. And when they went through and said, no, this is actually a teacher salary, they put it into the salary line. So I just want to note that for people's information.
Rick?
I'm coming forward because I noticed when Nolan spoke, the microphones picked up what she was saying. And I don't think I'm going to be able to speak as eloquently as Nolan did, but I am also equally concerned about the perception of the public about teacher salaries in this district. I was on the negotiating team in 2008 when the market crashed, and we generously agreed to not take a raise on top of our steps. And we did it again in 2011, and we did it again 3 years later. And I don't think any of us believe that we could possibly negotiate for a raise right now, but I really, really want to make it clear that our teacher salaries are the lowest in Franklin County, and that we have agreed to very low teacher raises on top of our steps. And that said, I was at a town meeting in Northfield a couple of weeks ago and willingly voted for a 2.75% increase in town employee raises on top of their steps. Steps are not cost of living increases, people. They're not. They're here because we have to put out our own money and our own time for our own professional development so we can be recertified and approved to continue to teach in our districts. And our districts deserve experienced teachers, and we pay to be your experienced teachers so that we can provide the best education for your students. Please do not feel like what is being reported here reflects poorly on our teachers, because they do not. And anybody who is on a school committee knows that if they have a particular teacher population that they are maintaining from one year to the next, there is a step increase until you've worked for 15 years, and then there is not. But there is a predictable amount that they need to include in the budget for teacher raises, for teacher salaries, every year. And that's on the superintendent and the school committee. I'm sorry, that's true.
That's true. That's true.
I am not only a teacher in this district, but I am a taxpayer in this district. I live in Northfield. Thank you.
This is what's next. We may have to ask. Yes.
I'll speak for myself as a school committee member, and that is, I agree with the previous two speakers.
No,
This is not the fault of the teachers. This is the fault of management. This is the fault of governance. I have fault in this. It's not, we can't lay this off on the teachers. These are, you know, 3 years ago we agreed to contracts. So let's move beyond the blame game. The blame's with governance, the blame's with management.
I would like to move on to item number 3, discussion of the district's options. I'm not sure what we need to speak on to this. David put this on, and I would defer to David to what he
Can I
had
just
thought.
speak on the general topic?
Yes.
Before we went to the nitty-gritty?
Yes.
I mean, I've only been on this committee for a little over a year now, and I will tell you, I have worked really hard to understand the budget. I have tried repeatedly to get information from our superintendent about our budget, and I have asked questions and been basically stonewalled repeatedly. And I can't stand it anymore.
Can we stop the applause so we can hear what's being said?
What I want to say is, I trust Brenda. I trust our our principals, who I've looked at the expenditure reports and I've seen how carefully they've managed their budget. I trust you, Tanya. But I cannot entertain another single document with numbers on it coming out of this district unless it comes from a state person who's approved it or an auditor who's approved it, because I have no faith in a single number. I don't feel like I can responsibly make any decisions for our district at this point, because I have lost faith completely in our ability to decipher the mess that we're in. And I don't want to do anything until someone from outside comes in and tells me what is going on.
Martha?
I just wanted to follow up on what you're saying and how this will affect our discussion of the options. I think you're saying that we as a committee, or you as a committee member and we as a committee, are we able to make a decision on these 3 district options coming out of the conversations that Pat and others have had with Department of Revenue and DESE? Do we need, are you saying you feel like you need to be absolutely sure that the numbers are right before we even go on to future options?
Yeah.
Okay.
I don't trust anything at this point.
So did you, when you spoke, Pat and others of you who have spoken with state agencies and so forth, have you had the feeling that we can go forward? Do you feel that we know the number that we need and that we need to move forward now to get a loan, or have the state take it over partially or not partially, or what do you feel like?
What are our options?
Yeah, what exactly did they say, and what exactly are the different options? It was my knowledge from speaking to, basically, it's the Department of Revenue, Local Services, that Mary Jane Handy, remember she was here?
Yeah.
Pat,
Okay.
can you lift the mic just a couple inches, please?
What did they? It would be nice, but I'm not sure.
So that was Mary Jane
All right.
Handy, Department of Revenue.
Okay, I spoke to her, and she had played with the figures. She had talked to several people at DESE, and she said that we were about $1 million in the deficit. And then afterwards, you spoke to them, and what, did you garner anything different than what I did?
No.
So those are the figures that are coming out of DOR from what figures that, when they came here, what was it, around the 1st of April, Peggy?
I think it was April 4th that we met with Mary Jane.
Mary Jane and another associate of hers from DOR were here, and they spent the morning with us speaking, David, Ruth, Peggy, and myself, and the 2 of them, and then they spent the afternoon looking through our books. And they were so confused that they left not having gotten done what they thought they could do in a half a day. But they did get information, and they went back and digested it, and that's what made another phone call that started all this.
Okay, so can I just ask one follow-up
Sure.
on that? So referring to Roman numeral 3, number 1 says act on auditor recommendation, which is what you have just spoken about.
Right.
Okay. And if you're seeking state assistance, it does not mean you're going into receivership that was referred to earlier.
No.
So this would be a matter of taking a loan, but the state isn't coming in and
There's some
and
They
decimating
would
the school.
bring us a financial review board, which has veto power over our actions.
In other words,
Maybe you
everything
can-
you spend, everything you decide
With-
to spend,
with-
they look at every single transaction. So if you're gonna
With
settle-
receivership or with a loan?
It's
With
not
a loan and a
it's-
financial review board. If you go to a loan which has to be approved by the legislature, it comes with a financial review board.
Oh, okay.
Okay? The repayment term can be as long as 10 years.
David, maybe you can let Russell answer some of these questions. That's why he's there.
So that is
Okay.
basically what they told me, but it's, so I've gone through this in Pittsfield, for example, years ago. And basically, when I settled teacher contracts, that contract had to go to the review board. They decide whether they're gonna fund it or not. So you can't spend any money without the board approving it. The other thing that would happen, and this happens on my committee, is I mean, in my opinion, in all of this, you need to have statements. On my finance committee, I get a statement of how we're doing every time we have a meeting, essentially. So I know if we're going to have a deficit or not. And that's known throughout the year, so you don't get to the end of the year and find out you have a deficit. So there's certain things that they're going to put in place so that you couldn't possibly get to this situation again, while they're here at least. But the other thing they're going to tell you is that you have, you know, the amount of money you have, the number of buildings you have, the number of students you have, it has to match. So right now, you're overspending in areas, and I think they're going to tell you this, you're overspending in areas because you don't have a match between, you know, your staff and your students and your buildings and your students. And so things have changed for the district. You've lost students. You know, the Vermont situation with tuition, that employer left. You know, the nuclear power plant is going away, and so you needed to predict that that revenue source was going to go down, and it really wasn't predicted. So that's one of the biggest problems of the budget. Okay. So I think going forward, they're going to tell you things like that, and they're going to basically get you back on track if they come in. Which I think, based on your revenue, your cash flow right now, because they're worried actually that you might not get to the end of the year and have enough money, because you really are very close right now. Okay. As I think Tanya was saying. So that's when they come in, because if your cash flow doesn't meet your bills, the state will come in, you'll have a finance advisory board. Now, what would happen is if you don't meet their recommendations, you don't look at things like, you know, it's going to be very difficult things. For this amount of money, it would be things like closing buildings and laying off staff, and I mean, it's going to be things that you don't want to do. If you're not able to do those things, at some point, that's where school systems go into receivership, because if you can't make the decisions to change to a point where you're sustainable, which based on this, it doesn't look right now the way you're heading, you're just not really sustainable. So you have less kids, you're going to have to budget totally differently, and you're going to have to get more money from the towns than you did. The $10,000 is not nearly enough to cover it.
Sharon? I was kind of hoping to hear that that the state, with the numbers from the auditor and DESI, the three of them getting together and perhaps recommending something that would work for us. But I don't hear that here. I don't hear them saying, well, here's our recommendation based on all the information we've gathered. I don't hear that.
Well, if they come in, they're going to figure out exactly how far in the red you are. And then after that happens, they will give you options. It's going to be some of the things I just said. Yeah. I'll guarantee you they tell you you're going to have to, you know, that they're going to recommend closing schools. That's probably first thing they're going to tell you.
Multiple schools?
In my guess, that's probably what they're going to say. That doesn't mean you have to do it, but it means it's going to be, they're going to put on the table all the things you would have to do to get back to a place where you're not losing money every year. But they will do that. It just won't be now, because they need to figure out what the actual number is. Is it 900,000? Is it $1 million?
Yeah.
You know, what's the number?
I guess that's my thing. If we went with, let's say, number one, wouldn't there be some parameters, some guidelines that they tell you, you have to do this if we're going to do this for you? Like, we're recommending you close 2 schools or lay off this many people. But that's something we are going to have to figure out ourselves.
They'll assist you, but ultimately it's the committee. Your job is to figure out, once you have the numbers, your job's going to be to figure out which of those options are the ones you're going to have to do. Now, of course, you're going to talk to the teachers, you're going to talk to the community, but you're going to be making some very difficult decisions. I mean, this is a huge number that you have to overcome.
So that's a condition of taking the loan, then, is going through what you just described. Does it happen simultaneously?
I don't know what they're going to do with the loan, because you're having such difficulty paying this one. So I'm not sure. I really don't know what they're going to do. If they're going to immediately come in and say, well, here's a loan, or whether they're going to say, we need to know more information before we loan you more money. My guess is they're going to have to loan you money because you need to make your payroll.
Right.
So, you know, I don't know
how that's how it worked on a practical basis, what the time frame was.
Yeah, I'm not positive. That's.
Sounds like getting a loan is not the first option we should consider. Yes? No? I'm just trying to get a sense of things.
It's either that or
looking at your current situation, I mean, you have to get a RAN every year, no matter what. So in this case, it's you have to do it. just to meet your payroll in the beginning of the year until your assessments happen. I agree with Tanya that I think you have to change your regional agreement, get the money earlier. It doesn't make sense to continually look for a loan every year just to make payroll in the beginning. But you have much bigger problems than that. The issue is, even with that, you're spending every single penny you have just to pay that bond. And then you're starting the year and need to pay payroll. So you need another loan to do that. So
You're always looking for
you have, it is not a teacher issue. It's not the teacher salaries. It's a structural issue that you have with the school in the budget, in the size of the school versus the amount of money you spend to run that school. It's not matching up. That's the problem. It's not how much you're paying everybody. It's more about how many people you have actually, and how many buildings you have. It's difficult to run the system. It's impossible to run the system the way you have it now based on these numbers.
Sharon, did you have your hand up first?
And then Sue? I think Sue did, then
Sue?
after Sue.
Can I make a motion that we have the state come in and help us with our financial problem here?
I'll second that.
What's that mean?
You mean take the loan?
No.
No, we
I
have
want-
already
I
got a-
want the state to come in and be the financial oversight on our finances and report back to this committee.
You can make a request, a formal request by the committee that the state set up a finance advisory board. They're looking at that anyway, but you can make it for us.
All right.
What's
Should I
your-
change the motion?
Can I ask for Russell's recommendation on that? I'd just like to know what you think, if that's what we should do, or what do you think?
Well, I think you have a motion, so you second the motion and then discussion.
All right.
I'm second.
Yes,
Oh,
I'm second.
Can I have some discussion?
What do you mean my recommendation is?
Do you think that's what we should be doing at this point, from your conversations with people?
I think the state needs to come in.
Okay, that was what I thought too. Peggy? What?
You said he thinks the state needs to come in.
So when we met with the DOR, I mean, at that point, she was still waiting for final reports for fiscal 17. The year hadn't even been closed. And she said if she hadn't received them by the 15th of April, the state would be coming in sooner rather than later. I guess they did receive those.
On about the 14th.
However, if we had known the extent of the deficit for fiscal 17, we should have started a study committee to look at closing our two smallest elementary schools out of necessity, and given the parents and the staff and the townspeople time to weigh in on it, to absorb it, and to come to terms with it.
Can I just say something real quick on knowing where the books were at the end of fiscal 17? A lot of what is in the books is your revenues, and when you don't have good reporting on that from prior treasurers that were here, there were a lot of double entries, reverse entries and stuff that myself and another advisor that came in to assist before I came on had to make corrections on. So it took that long to get us to a point where I was comfortable saying, close your books. So that was part of the issue too, was there were entries for revenue that needed to be reviewed before a good number could be looked at.
Okay.
I just feel that we can't throw up our hands and say, oh, let the state come in and figure it out for us. This committee needs to set a direction where we're going to make these cuts. I mean, nobody wants to close those two elementary schools, but I don't want to decimate the high school either.
The whole district.
So we have to figure out what's going to affect the most kids and how we can go on from here. I mean, I'm a Leiden resident. However, if my kids were still young and they were one of the 23 residents in that school, I feel that they would be better served at Bernardston than they would be in the little tiny school with the combined grades. And so few kids?
Sue?
I guess, I just feel like this committee can function managing a budget when we have the leadership to relate to around our budget. And right now, we don't have that. And we haven't had it for a long time. And so I want the state to come in to be that leader that we can trust the figures from so we can do our work. And I don't ever want to hear anyone on this committee again say to me, you're out of line, we only vote the bottom line. Okay? It is time to do our work on our budget. We're supposed to approve transfers, we're supposed to be reported to regularly, we're supposed to regularly know our revenue in relation to our expenses, etc.
We haven't voted.
And we have not had that kind of
transfer
accurate
yet this
information
year.
to work with.
No, we have not. Is there any other discussion amongst the committee before I recognize the audience? David?
We can default our way into this decision very easily by missing payroll, having our employees' payroll checks bounce or be unable to even issue them, by failing to make health insurance payments, or by failing to repay this loan. This cash flow says that we'll need $10,000 or $20,000 to pay off the loan, and we're going to be out of money. When you've lost $1 million, you've been all over the news, what bank do you think is going to loan it to us? We should be proactive and get a loan now before we're underwater. But we can force this decision, continue to fiddle. It just happens that the $1 million that we've identified as a cash flow need is equal to the accumulated losses. So we've used our working capital to pay things we had no revenue for or that we overspent, and we have no money. I don't believe we're going to be able to go back to a bank and borrow. I think we should be asking the state for a loan now, and we won't be looking at repaying 100% in 1 year. We can negotiate terms. It's going to be painful, but not as painful as trying to pay for it all in 1 year, folks.
Oh, okay, sure.
I'm just not comfortable to give the present administration money again to mismanage. So that's why I think the state needs to be the gatekeeper.
I just want to clarify your motion. Your motion was to have the state give us assistance.
Financial oversight.
Financial oversight. It was not specifically, as it says in number 1,
About a loan.
to get a loan.
I don't want to even talk about a loan.
You're not talking about money.
Until the state says to me clearly, this is the situation.
But they don't give you a loan unless they come in. So the Finance Advisory Board would be here at the same time the loan would happen.
So this is all part of the thing. So if we pass this motion that Sue has made, we will be opening the door to having assistance from the state, and the oversight board, right?
Yes.
Am I correct on that? I'm just getting terminology mixed up. Which would then possibly lead, or definitely lead, to a decision on the loan once the figures are verified. Is that
for long-term?
Is that what we're expecting to happen from this decision?
Well, I can't say the state will definitely loan you money, but I would say the Finance Advisory Board would come in and look at your figures and then decide what they have to do.
Okay.
I mean, in many places, I know recently, I think Lynn got a loan, a fairly large loan. I mean, that's what the state does. If they think they're not going to want you to miss payroll and not pay your bills. So my guess is they would come in with a Finance Advisory Board and loan money, but I can't say that for sure.
But to Peggy's point, who pointed out that the school committee needs to be proactive about this and making decisions, we would still be working with
I mean, I take responsibility. We're going to have hard decisions to make. I don't want to skirt those decisions. I just feel like I cannot even start working without someone outside of our district saying to me, this is the numbers. These are the numbers. This is what you're working.
Okay.
I just want to, I've seen a few hands out here, and I think we need to.
Michelle came up.
Shall I?
She spoke.
I don't see.
Well, I don't know his name.
Attorney Dupre?
Russell.
Okay. I feel this is a community issue right now. 2 of our towns have not voted on the budget. Lydenville Saturday. I'm not confident as chair of the finance committee, standing up in front of the townspeople to support the figures that we have. The line items keep moving. There was raises to administrators that we kept arguing. We didn't get any respect in the community or as a school committee. So I'm very concerned. We have enough money to get through till June 30th, but starting July 1st, I don't have a confidence in any of the figures that we have been given. As a matter of fact, I have 3 different letters here from the superintendent's office to Leiden for the technology assessment. The first one was $1,300.
What was the date on that?
March. The second one, and our select board is here, they can tell you, they called the superintendent's office, that was April 4th. They asked for a different assessment because we've been paying around $8,000 a year. The second letter was whatever, and then the third letter, we're going to town meeting, says $10,000. If you take the total amount of the technology assessment and take Leiden's percentage of 6.16, none of these letters match. Now, I don't know what the interest rate was, but I can't stand up
I will say that
town
that
meeting.
6.16% that you're talking about, that has something, I can't 100% speak to this, but I know that a lot of documents were given to the towns. That has to do with net minimum contribution and all these things. There are designated percentages that I can email you when I'm here next week.
This is a separate
I know,
technology
but the technology was split based on certain percentages, the capital's on a certain percentage, and the actual assessment's on a certain percentage. Those are all determined on different percentages, and I can get you that information
But
on
it's supposed to
Wednesday.
be 3 equal installments. That's not equal.
Just an example.
That's not,
Right,
that's an
but-
example.
and I can check on that
And so
for you.
for 3 years, we paid 8,000. How could we pay 1,000? Then go, what was the second one, guys? Help me, Jeff, Lance. 7,000, I have them right here, but I can't, I don't wanna waste time. And then 10,000. How can we stand up in front of our residents and our taxpayers and say, vote for this? I can't in good conscience say that. And I don't wanna put this school even further behind, but we have to come to terms. This is a community problem now. And, you know, I think it's gotta get out in the open, and we gotta be honest with each other, and we gotta work together to solve these problems. And they're gonna be difficult issues. And I don't know, you know, maybe I'll call the DOR tomorrow and I'll ask them, what do you advise for the town of Leiden to vote on the school budget?
Jane. Jane, did you have your hand up? No. Jeff, you did. I did.
I'm just curious as far as, if this is to happen or whatever, what happens to the district agreement? Does that become you? Where's the statute that?
No, that would still be, the regional agreement would still be in place. Yeah, it's,
Well, you said earlier about closing schools or.
yeah, and I'm trying to give you examples of what I think the state will come in and recommend. They can't make you do it. If you go into receiverships, they could, but a finance advisory board basically is an oversight board that doesn't let you overspend. And they're gonna check any major bills, and they're gonna make sure that the budget remains in the black. But they cannot make you close schools. They can't make you do certain things. What I'm saying is, when you have, in my experience, when you have hundreds of thousands or $1 million, the only way to save that type of money is closing schools and laying off staff. There's no other way to do it, because you don't have $1 million in electric bills and those type of things. It's staff at the public school, unfortunately.
Pat, is Ruth, does she plan on going to the last 2 town meetings, Bernardston or Leiden?
I have no idea.
Is anybody, is Gail going to be there, Gail, or?
I will be there, but it will be difficult for me to, I'm not the business manager.
Right, I understand that.
I wear 4 hats in the district, but I am not the business manager.
I have no idea. She didn't go to the other 2, so I'm guessing maybe not. We may be surprised, who knows? Yes, Jack?
I'd like to support Sue's idea to get the state involved sooner rather than later. I think there's going to be a publicity stigma involved with that. But right now, the committee doesn't have confidence in the numbers. The community has a problem with confidence as well, and that needs to be addressed by getting another expertise in it. And that will support what you're saying.
One more, and then we're gonna. One more, and then we're gonna do. Okay, way in the back. A short one, please.
Short. I've been coming to these meetings for 1.5 years. And I brought up the food budget thing, first meeting in Leiden, about the E&D, and nothing was done about that. You've known you've had a money problem because you've been asking the towns for their assessment monies early to make payroll. Now we've come down to hard times, and I haven't heard anything about the kids at any of these meetings. I know that Leiden and Warwick are small schools. It's a convenience right now to keep those open when we're getting down to this kind of tough times. I think we need to look at keeping the programs for the kids by, if you don't minimize your schools, you're going to start stripping the staff at Pioneer, at Bernardston, at Northfield, and not providing the kids with the education that they need. You move Leiden to Bernardston, and if Bernardston had the 6th grade class there, they're still getting 6th grade education. You may be able to keep the music. If you move the 6th grade class here to Pioneer and open a middle school, you're going to provide a lot more opportunities for those 6th graders here, maybe a foreign language class for the kids that are able to do it. Sports, band, music at maybe a little bit higher level than at the elementary. I think it's time to make those choices, police ourselves, and not let the state come in and dictate what they're going to have us do. We need to make those choices on our own and try to keep programs that we have, or even bolster some of the ones that we have here. Because we're going to be running it thin and cutting staff. If you can do it the right way, you can still provide a good education, and that's what these kids need. But I haven't heard anything about providing a better education for the kids at any of the meetings. Thank you.
Our committee members have called the vote, so I would like to do that.
I think the public should be able to speak a little bit more.
What's your?
Thank you.
Well, it's your call, but.
Wait, just a minute. We're discussing.
So, you're basically the only place I attend where the public speaks at a meeting. So normally there's public comment at the beginning of a meeting.
There was no public comment session tonight, though.
Yeah, and then after that public comment, the committee speaks amongst themselves. You vote amongst yourselves, and then the next meeting, if there's further public comment, that happens at the beginning of the meeting. That's not the practice you've had here, but that's the way it works everywhere else. So it's up to the committee to decide how much public comment to allow, if any. Some committees don't allow any, actually. But you have a different practice. I would say, my guess is when the state comes in, they're going to tell you to do it the normal way, which is public comment first, and then you have discussion at the committee level. Because what happens occasionally, like an issue like this, is the committee is really not talking amongst themselves enough to get to a decision. And so it's good to get input. The problem is I don't hear the committee actually making decisions here amongst themselves. So I think that's why the practice is usually the other way. It's up to the chair if you want to allow a few more comments.
Well, I think after Mr. Townsley talked, I said he was the last one because committee members had asked for a vote. So I think we will do that, and I apologize for anybody that had their hand up, but
In the future, let's just put public comment on the agenda. That would be awesome.
it always has been on the agenda, and it just was left, exactly, it was just left off.
And I'm concerned, and I apologize with all due respect, I'm extremely concerned at the fact that the committee, without having factual knowledge of the numbers and factual knowledge of the systems in which the state could come in and assist the school or not assist the school, and a vote is going to be made without having all of the information that each one of you need to make the appropriate decisions that are going to be impacting our schools and our children.
Is everybody ready to vote?
I'm not.
That's what Sue was asking.
One last.
If we don't go for a loan, we're going down. I'll vote in favor of this, but I'm going to follow up with a motion that we seek a loan.
I'm sorry, are you amending the motion?
I'm not amending it. I will vote for this.
Okay.
We need the state to come in, but the state has not offered that alone. Have not only offered, the state has not offered technical assistance. They have not said, oh, petition us for technical assistance. They said, you're going to miss this payment. You're going to default. You need a loan. You need to apply for a loan. And I said, can you help us figure out how much? They said, no, that's your job. That's your job. So let's vote on this, and then I intend to make another motion.
Okay, the motion has been made and seconded. All those in favor?
Can you read this motion?
Okay.
Yeah.
Please, if she could flip the pages quick enough.
Okay, so the motion is that this district requests the state come in to help us with our problem and clarify the financial figures. That's all.
So is that a request for financial oversight?
I think it's really motion to request that the state provide a finance advisory board to the district.
What was the end of your statement? I couldn't hear it, sorry.
Motion to request that the state provide a finance advisory board to assist the district. You're asking the state to come in and provide an oversight board.
So that's the motion, and it was seconded by Sharon. All those in favor of that motion?
Aye.
Unanimous? All right. And David,
Madam
you had
Moderator,
something?
I move that the school committee seek or request a loan from the state.
Is there a second?
I'll
Do you
second.
produce an amount for that?
The cash flow that they accept would advise.
Robin has seconded that. David, I did not hear that in my conversations with DOR. And I'm just wondering where you heard that and how you heard that and all of
I
that.
spent over an hour on the phone with MJ, the director of accounts, the person who signs our free cash.
And did you do that as budget chair, or how did you do that? Or just as a committee member? Or as Warwick Town, you know? I mean, you wear lots of hats.
Yeah, well, I did it as a school committee member. If you recall the meeting where the auditors clearly recommended that we seek a loan. Peggy, you were there. Did you hear anything else besides we should seek a loan from the state, from the auditors?
They didn't give us any amount though.
No, they didn't give it. They didn't even give it with benefit of the cash flow projection. They just said, you're in trouble. You need to seek a loan from the state. And that was their recommendation.
I just wondered, as budget chair, you followed this budget this whole year, and I wondered if you had heard something that the rest of us hadn't.
No, I heard this yesterday talking with MJ, but she represented that our auditors made more recommendations than just seek a financial review board and a loan. And I can't remember them, but you were there, Peggy, you were there. What were their other recommendations in the alternative? I don't remember any. MJ said there were some, but she wasn't able to line them
Talk
out.
to DOR, Desi. her
Yeah,
does.
I don't remember really any alternatives. It was basically,
Right.
I'm afraid you're going to have to
Exactly.
bring in
That's all I remember too.
the financial advisory board.
All right, so David has a motion and a second. Is there any discussion amongst the committee? Sus- Oh, go ahead, sorry.
There's no number, there's no documentation, there's one person who I don't even understand the authority he had to have the conversation, having a conversation with the Department of Revenue. This is crazy. Alone. You don't request a loan unless you understand your financial situation and you know how much you need and why and how you're gonna pay it back. I mean, we're not gonna just approve a loan.
We're not
David?
approving, we're requesting. We're a
I'm not
bad
gonna
credit
request
ri-
one
we-
based
We are
on
a
that.
bad credit risk. I'm saying we should not go back to the bank. It's too ugly. We should go to the state at this point.
I'm not gonna
We should not
listen.
wait for the bank to turn us down.
Okay,
Fine.
David,
Move that.
David, would it be possible for you to come up with a figure and we have a meeting in a week? And to come back to us with that figure?
Figure for David.
Vote,
From the
vote.
state, not from him.
Vote.
Well,
Or the auditor.
Vote.
We have a cash flow prepared by our treasurer who was here.
Vote.
And it says that we need to borrow $379,909,979.09. That's $1 million to me. That's
Okay.
what this cash flow says.
All right, so David, would you be willing to get from the DOR a figure and have it in writing from the DOR that you could present to the committee? Because I think they want state figures and not something that is sort of.
No, my discussions with Mary Jane were that we need to tell them what we think we need, and that they would then assess that they're not going to be a forensic accountant and figure out our thing. That's why the first vote we had here, don't place a lot of hope that the state's going to come in here and save us.
Bill, I saw your hand up first.
So we're going to ask the state for an advisory board. How quickly do they act on that? And how soon will we know what kind of number we're looking at?
My understanding is I think tomorrow they're talking internally regardless of what you do here tonight. So I would imagine that's going to happen very quickly. I don't know exactly, weeks maybe. But I do agree that I think making a request to the state that you'd like them to make a loan to the district, I mean, there's no harm in that. And the reality is you need the money. So whether you get it through Iran or you go to the state, if you can't get it from the state, then you're going to have to go out into the marketplace and try to get a bank to loan you the money.
Because we borrow it every year anyway.
You're going to borrow the money no matter what. Even if you didn't have this issue, you have the issue with when you get your money from the towns. So you're borrowing every year, it appears. I mean, this would be a request that the state be the one to loan you the money. There's strings tied to that, obviously. If you go to the bank and they loan you money, you don't have any strings really other than you got to pay it back. When you get it from the state, there's going to be strings tied to it, which is going to be you need to make cuts. You need to do that anyway. So, you know, I don't see any harm in trying to get a loan from the state. And I would say you could amend the motion to be up to $1 million, but that's something where you might want to have a little more information, but it does look like it's going to be, I mean, you asked for 1.2 last year, or you got 1.2 through the RAN. This year it's somewhere around 959 to $1 million again, so.
I guess what I meant is if we've already asked them to come in and advise us, will we find out soon how much we're going to need to ask?
I don't know that that would be soon. I mean, if they come in, they're going to do detailed analysis of your budget.
So that
where where things are.
So we're going to need to get the loan before we really know exactly how much.
That would be my guess, but I'm not positive.
And they're also gonna ask us, what are you gonna do about this? I mean, they aren't gonna come in with a magic wand and make everything.
You've got to do the work.
They've got to see that we're acknowledging this problem and we're coming up with a plan that is for the are the best for our kids, but we're gonna have to make cuts. Nobody wants to.
So, did either of you have your hands up? Okay, David did.
I'd be willing to stipulate that any loan, before we closed on it, would need a subsequent vote of this committee. This is just to get the ball rolling. This is not the authorization to actually sign a loan. We can come back to the school committee with numbers and support for that, but we should open this door now.
To start talking to them.
So,
Okay. Can I just ask one more timing thing? So now I understand a little bit better what you're saying. So we make a request for the loan. We don't have to even put an amount on it?
We will.
We will, but, and we need to do this soon because of cash flow problems. Am I correct about that?
When is the new ramp expected?
So,
July 1st?
30.
June 30th.
Because we run out, okay, so it has to be paid. So, would these two things that we're doing, we passed motion number 1 to get the financial, what is it, advisory, whatever. Financial Advisory Board, okay. So that's an entirely separate action that we just took with motion number 1. Requesting the loan is another entirely separate action. So we don't have to do the Financial Advisory Board oversight before we decide the loan, because that's going to be a long-term thing, with the state coming in and helping us with a long-term situation. I'm just asking if that's, am I right about that? Okay.
My sense is that the loan will precede or the talk of the loan will be why the Finance Advisory Board. I'm unaware of a Finance Advisory Board arriving in a school system that doesn't get a loan from the state. I've never heard of that.
Yeah, and the key is the cash flow.
I thought they kind of went together.
So the state comes in when the cash flow is a problem, because you're not meeting your bills.
Yeah.
So if you had a deficit, but the cash flow wasn't an issue because you hadn't overspent the prior year, but that's not the case here. You don't have anything. So you have no way to, there's no cushion.
Mm-hmm.
You have, this projection's negative 14,000 at the end of the year, which means that money, there's nowhere for that money to come from. So David's right that the two go together. And then, as I said, there's restrictions for that. You get the money, but it's not free money that you just get and they don't expect anything. They expect you to pay it, and they expect you not to ask for another loan, which means you got to fix your problem.
Sue?
I see down here, we're gonna vote on the hiring of a business manager and director of finance. Are you?
Not this evening. It's not.
Okay, I guess I would say I would feel so much more comfortable having a discussion about taking out a loan if I were talking to a business manager or a director of finance for our district that I trusted. But that person doesn't exist at the moment, so.
We're hoping that name will come in front of you. We're hoping next, in a week, that we will have both a superintendent interviews and a director of finance or business manager person to vote on. So we've got a lot of work to do, some of us, in the next week, but we're hoping next week we'll have that.
So I guess as a follow-up, if we're meeting again in a week, we're hopefully going to have some new administrators to begin to relate to. We've invited the state to come in. They're who we would be taking the loan from, right?
Maybe.
Why do we have to vote tonight on the idea of a loan? Can we just wait until we have a conversation with the oversight board about that loan and the process of that loan, and until we have some administrators in place who can guide this committee? Or does it have to be tonight?
Do you know what the timeline is? If you ask for a loan, when that might occur? I mean, we're going to need it by the end of this school year.
I don't know.
I mean, I just.
Pittsfield was 15 years ago, probably.
Yeah.
I think, waiting till the next meeting, if you do that, I'm not sure, you're not going to have any other information next meeting. It's going to be, the most that we could do is possibly I could call Mary Jane at DOR and say, do you think we need a loan? I think she thinks we do. But she's not going to be able to tell you anything other than it looks like you need about $1 million. But that'll be the same answer next week too. I don't think you're gonna have a lot of extra information next week to make a decision.
So if I were to vote on this tonight, it would be just on the idea, I mean, what, the idea
We'd have to say up to $1 million.
of asking the state for a loan?
No, it would be that, you know, probably Pat or I would call Mary Jane and say, listen, the committee voted that they're requesting the assistance of a finance advisory board, and they're requesting a loan from the state. You know, what do you want us to do next to make that happen? Do you think it's around $1 million? And then in your next meeting, you get some more information from probably Pat saying, Mary Jane said X, Y, and Z, and this is the amount, and then you vote on the amount. If they agree to the concept of giving you a loan at all. But.
Jenny, I saw you first.
From what's been said, ideally to have the new people in place would be great. Unfortunately, in order to make payroll, which happens prior to a new superintendent and a new business manager starting, we need the money before they're in place. Because we need this money by June 30th. New people won't come until July 1st. Is that correct?
I think that if we could get a business manager in here tomorrow, I think it would be a good thing.
But that's not going to happen.
It's not going to happen tomorrow, but it may happen before the end of the year.
Right.
But
that doesn't.
Okay. But I'm concerned about the word may. That doesn't solve the problem of us definitely meeting payroll through the end of the year. The word, you know, may have one, we don't have a crystal ball. And I think we need to ensure our employees that, yes, we are going to meet payroll, so they will be paid through the end of this fiscal year.
I think we should, with the idea that we're getting some word about the business manager next week, I think it would be prudent for us to wait till next week to make this decision about a loan. I know we need it right away, but I'm very concerned as to who's going to manage this money once we get it.
Well,
that's where I'm coming from.
Financial Review Board will be all over it.
The state
We don't know how long it's going to be before they get it.
They're not going to give us the money to do what we've been doing.
Right.
This is not going to happen. And the other reason to do this now is this requires legislative approval. I do not know what provision is made for if the Senate and General Court are not in session. There may be some administrative executive option. I'm unaware of it. I was told this requires legislative action.
By who? No, I mean,
by the General Court and by the
Court.
Massachusetts Senate.
I was told the same thing. We need to vote on it.
I think we need
A little lead time is in order.
So we have a motion and a second. Bob, one thing, and that's all.
Okay, Pat, most of you have known we have a deficit bigger than the lunchroom deficit, unfortunately.
Right.
You gotta pay your bills, you gotta pay your staff. You can't default on your loan that you gotta pay back. So it's only logical to get going on this loan application. You can decide how much next week or the week after, but if you don't get going, you may default on your staff, and then what's gonna happen? You don't pay them, it's triple expenses. You don't pay them when they're due.
So I would, Sue, one last thing, yes.
Can we just clarify the motion to make it clear that we are voting on giving the chair of our committee, Pat, permission to begin discussion with the Department of Revenue around a required loan? Or the lawyer. Or the lawyer. Or a lawyer.
Yeah. Thanks.
You could do a conference call.
Yeah.
And that we're not actually taking out a loan. We are letting the state know that we recognize that we need a loan.
Can somebody read
The
back?
motion was to seek a loan from the state, and later on, David said he'd be willing to stipulate that before a dollar value was set, that there would be a full committee vote on the value.
And I would add that if for any bank I've ever been involved with, this motion wouldn't be enough to close. There's going to need to be an affirmative vote of this committee for a dollar amount at a stated term and stated interest rate with conditions that we're going to have to accept. So don't worry about this money flowing in here too easily. This is an uphill battle.
Okay, so there's a motion and a second on the floor. All those in favor?
So, wait a minute.
Yeah.
What about what I just said, that I want you and Russell working on this? Is that an amendment to the motion? What do I do with
Does
that?
anybody disagree? Can we reflect it as consensus?
Isn't that
Let's
procedural?
Well, she wants better,
Assurance?
better assurance. Let's put it in that the committee by consensus agreed that, fill in the blank.
That our council and our chair will be in contact with the Department of Revenue to open the process, the chair of our committee. Yes, yep, not the chair of the budget committee, the chair of our committee will be initiating the conversation with the Department of Revenue about the fact that we know we're gonna need a loan.
That we are seeking.
That was
Seeking a loan.
Seeking a loan.
Seeking a loan.
Does anybody need that read back to them?
No.
No. All those in,
Do you have to have a second vote on that?
That was by consensus.
yeah, it doesn't have to have.
Unless anybody
It's
objects.
not, the chair is the one who would do that type of thing.
Yeah. All those,
You can do it.
all those in favor?
Thank God.
Unanimous. Okay, so now we come to the nitty gritty, budget cuts to balance budget. Because we don't have any ideas of what we're supposed to do, I sort of feel like I'm floundering. Where do we start? We don't have the superintendent here to give us ideas of what.
We don't have the numbers.
We don't have the numbers, we don't have the information we need to make cuts that are representative of what we want, which is best for the kids. We've heard maybe school closings, but we hear that. We don't hear, you know, we want the best education we can for our children. And we don't have the stuff to make those decisions. Robin?
Can I just ask a question?
Sure.
Which budget are we trying to balance with point 2 under Article 3?
I think it's fiscal 19.
Are we trying to balance fiscal 19? Are we trying to balance
Yes.
fiscal 18?
This year's.
I have
No,
heard.
I propose this as one of 3 options for dealing with our cash flow and income loss. One thing would be to seek a loan and stop the hemorrhaging and spread out the payments for $1 million worth of overspending and under revenue over a few years. Another option would be to make all the necessary cuts in the next budget. Now, I could tell you, because I'm budget committee chairman and I spent some time on this, this is going to take a couple minutes, Sharon, I'm sorry. We're going to have to make more cuts that result from our operating at 2 small sizes. We got like 200 kids in 9 through 12 in the school from our sending towns. And we've got 700 and something kids in the district. The current budget has a substitute line that needs to be increased by about $50,000. It's just past history. We just know it. But our current budget doesn't have that. The special needs transportation is in at $150,000. It's not enough. We're proving it right now. That probably needs to double.
It's in at 350,000.
Yeah, yes. Our fuel, we just got our fuel bids in, and we need to increase what we are allocating for heating fuel by $30,000. We're running buses practically empty. You got to get on that, and don't go to the bus company to ask them how to fix it. You got to figure that stuff out.
Yeah, those numbers are really.
We've got to reserve adequately for unemployment insurance because we're not paying a premium that's going to be adjusted upward because of the experience. We're paying the freight when we lay somebody off, and we didn't know that. I didn't know that. You didn't know that.
But
That
Ruth should have known
contributed.
that.
Yeah, that contributed
Yep.
big time. Hey, it took me almost a couple of days of phone calls to suss that out. So that all adds up to $400,000 or $500,000 in cuts that we need to be looking at.
David, on top of that, we only budgeted 81,000 for a superintendent and 40 for a business manager. That is so under budgeted.
You probably need a full-time business manager.
We do. And I don't think you're ever gonna even get a part-time superintendent for 81,000, I'm sorry. And I've said that since the very beginning of this budget in October. We have just under budgeted so many necessary things. And I think the reason we did it is because we had conversations, we didn't have conversations. There were conversations held between the towns and the superintendent, and those conversations, that's what she decided to do, with not much input from the budget subcommittee.
So, just a couple of questions under item Roman numeral 3. So the word option doesn't really mean options, like we already voted on number 1 and passed it.
Oh, right.
Okay, so I guess I was confused by that. So we've already done number 1. So number 2 and 3 are referring to FY19. You're talking about next year's budget not being adequately funded for superintendent, blah, blah. Is that correct? You're talking about FY19? So is like the budget subcommittee going to come together and find new figures? Or how do we
make suggestions?
I guess David is chairman of the budget subcommittee, that's his call.
How does it, okay. I just wondered how we're going forward with that FY19 adjustments that need to be made, but we've already voted on the budget and accepted it, so how does that all work?
I don't know.
Okay.
So the number is already...
In order to increase one line, you have to decrease another line.
Exactly.
So the number is already voted on and been sent to the towns. That's the number we asked for. So if there are things that need to be paid for that were not in the that the line item will not cover, some other line item will need to be cut.
Okay. Okay.
So that would presumably, correct me if I'm wrong, Madam Chair, but I'm assuming that that would be at the recommendation of the budget subcommittee and then brought to full committee.
Yeah.
Okay. So it would be a line adjustment. We have to still come up with the same total if we want more money for a new superintendent.
That's
we
our
have to
total
cut something
at this
else.
point.
That's right, and the budget subcommittee will have to come up with recommendations on
Okay.
where cuts have to be made.
And like our secretary said, assuming that passes, we heard what Leiden was going to do, so depends what Bernardston does.
Right, I understand that. Right. There's 2 more towns that still have to vote on it to begin with.
Right,
Okay.
we could end up with less.
Sue.
Again, I don't feel like we can make any plans related to this item. I'm wondering if we could just move on. We don't have financial figures to do this kind of planning at this point.
Yep, I think you're right.
We need to do it soon, I know, but I'm not
We
prepared to do it right
meet,
now.
we are going to meet next week. The RIF notices went out for non-professional status teachers on the 15th. And I believe, Ariel, you're back there somewhere. I believe that the professional status RIFs would be sent by June 1st, am I correct?
Yes.
Okay, I thought I was right on that
All
one.
of all the letters regarding whether or not someone has a position in the coming year have to be out by June 1st.
Right. I believe everyone that had a non-professional status got RIF notices on the 15th. I have no clue in the world what's going to happen on June 1st. I don't know, everyone.
All non-professional.
So the obvious problem with that is you don't, in order to cut even 400,000, option 3, you should be sending out those notices by June 1st.
You have time restriction.
The question is going to be, how are you going to do that when today's May 17th? Typically, you direct administration to send out notices to do that, but I don't know that you want to do that here.
Well, we didn't direct them to do the last ones, and they happened.
Mm-hmm.
But your budget, whatever you vote for a budget, so you voted a budget that is showing a deficit. Your budget is not even, it's not balanced to start the year.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
So now you have to go back to administration and talk about what are the additional cuts we're going to get or look at to make this even semi-balanced. I think Dave is right. You're going to need a loan in the meantime, because none of these things happen quickly. I mean, even if you had to close a building, you have to look at your regional agreement to see if you can. You have to see if the towns have to vote on it or not. I mean, there's certain regional agreements, you can just close it as a committee. Other regional
have to
agreements,
vote.
you need a town to vote on it.
Mhm.
That may or may not happen.
4 times.
So you need to look at, you're gonna have to look at all of those things, hopefully with the assistance of the state, and try to figure out what you're doing next. In the meantime, though, it would make sense to try and send out the layoff notices on time. There's exceptions for emergencies. This obviously would probably be one. But still, I mean, you want your employees to know whether they have a job as well. So as soon as you can do that, the better, for their sake and for your sake.
So,
I'm just gonna say, is it possible for us as a committee to direct Gail and our principals to make a plan for that?
A plan for what?
For the cuts to personnel that might meet that number?
Well, you can direct your administrative team to bring to you a plan at the next meeting that would address.
So we have a superintendent who's not here, who, I don't really want her recommendations on that.
Yeah, but where
So,
you're at now. I
Where
mean,
do we go with that?
If I was on the committee, what I would do is make a recommendation. Well, I would vote that I want administration to give me options to cut, between $400 and $1 million. I want to see them all, and I want to see them in a concrete fashion where I can actually tell what it is and how much each cut saves. And then as a committee, you would look at all those different cuts and you decide which ones you can live with and which ones you can't. But as part of that process, they need to look at whether you can actually do it, because you can't just say we're going to close the school if you need to go through a process that takes 6 months. So you need to look at what are the realistic options right now. So there should be a clear chart where you just look at it and say, okay, that's option A, can we do that? Can we do B, C, and D?
Yeah, that's why I would like Gail and the administrators to work on it and get directly back to the committee.
It has to be the whole administrative.
The superintendent.
I'm just saying, it's been a year of, I don't want to see it again, I'm sorry. But the district agreement does not have language in it about school closure at this point, and we were told as a park committee when we had our conversation with the Department of Ed about the district agreement, that it is the school committee's purview to close the school. And we are in a conversation with them about
So I'd want to look at it.
updating that district agreement and
Yeah, I'd want to look at
having
that
language
myself.
about that process, but now we're suddenly here.
So I would have to look at the regional agreement to see what the process would have to be for sure, but
No.
you could tell administration to get the documentation to the chair, and the chair can review it in advance of the meeting. And if the chair's not happy with it, she can send an order to give me something else that is more understandable.
And that would be ready for the next meeting.
You're gonna have to do it by, when's your next meeting?
Next
Thursday.
So in order to meet the deadline in the contract, you should do that.
Okay.
The way I read it is this committee by a majority vote can vote to close the school, but then we need to send it back to the 4 towns at their next annual or special town meeting for them to vote, and it would have to be a majority.
Correct.
Which is 3 of the 4.
Would you like the agreement on that?
That's a comment.
Yeah.
I can get it. I mean, that's not a decision that's gonna be made tonight.
It's not gonna be a quick.
But the closing of building is unlikely to be the cut you're gonna make for July 1. I mean, you're gonna have to make a lot of cuts, but it's unlikely the buildings are going to be done. That's probably the long-term thing you need to look at. But for July 1, you're gonna have to come up most likely with the structure you have now, what can you cut to get anywhere close to this? But it's gonna be, I mean, that's a lot of people, unfortunately.
Sharon?
I have a feeling, Ralph, that in making those decisions of how many people we're gonna cut, I have a very bad feeling that it will come down to closing the school because of the amount of people that we need to lay off.
So I guess
Otherwise-
what I was saying before is, so have that on the sheet of options, but you gotta look at whether you can feasibly do it that quickly. And the reality is you might not be able to. So you may do this in steps, or you probably will have to do it in steps, because cutting $1 million all at once would be near impossible. But if you cut 400, and then you look at closing schools for next year, if you have to do that, maybe that's another 500, and then you're almost where you need to be. You use a loan to kind of cover the difference in the meantime. But it's, the state is going to do this for you at some point. The problem is you need to do something in the next couple of weeks to make this realistic. Because you don't want to be telling people in the middle of the year they're laid off. I mean, ideally, we send these notices out by June 1st.
I believe that will happen.
Do we need to direct that as a school committee?
It would not do any harm. Did you make a motion?
I didn't hear that.
I was a question. I just said, Pat stated she believed it would happen, and I said, should we direct that as a school committee? That notices be sent out by June 1st.
Well,
I'm trying to think how to.
You need to vote on how much you're cutting at the next.
So what we want to see is we want to see a detailed spreadsheet at the next school committee meeting showing cuts that can be made. You had a great phrase.
So this is the way.
Really
this is the way it would work. So I would say that you direct central office to come up with.
Direct the administrative team.
The administrative team in central office to come up with the cuts that would equal between $400 and $1 million. Then, as part of that, what should happen is central office goes to each building principal, and each building principal is going to have to look at their staff and their costs and figure out where they can cut things. And then when you comes to you, it should be basically by building. We're cutting 100,000 from Pioneer, we're cutting 100,000 from this elementary, 100,000 from Warwick, whatever it is. And you should be able to see where all the cuts are coming from. Now, the way this works is the committee is not looking at who the person is or what the position is. You have to vote on ultimately the dollar amount. So it's now you can get into, do you want to close down a music program and have lower class sizes for science or whatever? I mean, that's going to be within your realm of looking at those issues. But who gets laid off and all of that's dictated by the contract anyways. So there's provisions that'll deal with that. But you need something like that so you can see which buildings are being affected, how they're being affected, how much money is coming out of each place, and why. That's what I would want to make an informed decision.
So does that need to be a motion?
Yes.
So help me convince something we can vote on.
So I think if you make a motion that you direct central office administration to present budget cut recommendations up to the total amount of $1 million. The rest of it is really how it's supposed to work, the mechanics of it, but you don't need that in the motion.
Central office and the administrative team to deliver for preview to the chair prior to next week's meeting.
A bit of a time before, not just too long.
I can't hear what anyone's saying.
A motion.
Yeah.
For central office and the administrative team to deliver for preview to the chair 24 hours in advance to the next meeting. Cuts up to $1 million. Recommendations for cuts from each building that total up to $1 million. Did I get that right?
No. That's going to look like an impossible outcome because $1 million from your budget, all at once would be great. But I think you need to see what it would do. That's worst case scenario. I'm not saying vote on worst case scenario. I think the state would probably be happy with 500 or 600 or somewhere in that range. But I think you should see the full effect of what you're actually looking at, because that'll help you if you have to make a hard decision like closing a school or something. I think you need to see why you're doing it, and that will help you do that.
Okay, do you want
Sorry,
to,
second.
is there a second to that motion?
What's the motion?
You read it back. People need to.
Would you read it back to us?
The motion is to direct the central office and administrative team to present budget cut recommendations up to $1 million to be delivered to the chair for preview at least 24 hours before the next meeting.
Jenny?
Can we just, I believe part of that has to be by building, the cuts by building.
Well, except there's non-building things
Or
like special
shared.
needs, which we really can't savage, and
Well, then it shouldn't be
central
on
office,
there.
well, we need to review everything though, because equally damaging to not making cuts would be to make cuts that can't obtain and we spend the money anyway.
Right.
So we really have to look at it.
Realistic figures we need.
Realistic number.
Okay, I'll take a couple hands. There and there. Okay.
Seems to me, maybe I'm totally wrong, but council may help here. It seems to me since originally this committee basically underfunded the budget that they provided to the towns. I mean, we accept that. I mean, it's been stated here tonight. Is it, since we're looking for a funding source, talking about loans, it seems to me the obvious place to go, if it is possible, is to say, hey, we messed up. We need $1 million more. We need $300,000 from Bernardston. We need $400,000 from Northfield, and we need $150 from each of the towns. Now that doesn't sound solid how we're spending the money. That we need to take care of, whether it was with state guidance or whatever. But I don't understand why isn't there a way we can, because right now, correct me if I'm wrong, the towns, the increase over last year's budget is pretty much zero, right? I mean, it's the same.
We're paying $494,000 more.
Is it?
This coming year.
Oh, it is, okay. Then I'm wrong at that. But even some amount, at least to get through June 30th, if we're looking, because we're not looking at a big number, are we? In any event, it seems to me that, is that possible to go back to the towns at this late date and say, amend, if impossible where the town meetings haven't occurred, amend the budget, and the other town, Northfield's already had their, I guess,
And so it's Warwick.
and have a special town.
The process ain't there. The tax rates have been set, most towns have got free cash or.
They're not set for next year. You just passed the town meeting. How can they be set?
So, I mean, is
but,
it technically possible that the
it is
committee,
technically possible.
if the committee revoted a different budget sent to the towns, but the towns are under no obligation to put it on a warrant or do a special meeting. But is that possible? I mean, it's possible.
You pay now or you pay later. Because the town is ultimately going to pay, that's who's paying the loan, right?
So what I would say, earlier I said there's a structural problem.
If I may clarify, Jeff, if you want us to pay more money in this fiscal year, the tax rate's been set.
Oh, no, but for next fiscal year. Yeah,
So if you're talking 2018.
Fiscal 19, that's what we're talking about, yeah.
Or 19, yeah.
So part of your structural problem is you're overspending and you're not asking for enough from the towns. That's what the DOR would say. Because your budget is, so you created a situation where you overspent and you didn't ask for enough for the towns, so now you have a bigger deficit. So they're going to say that too. They're going to say you have to ask more of the towns. Now, of course, the towns may not have the ability to pay either. But that's a discussion the Finance Advisory Board would have.
But even a loan from the town is something that's short.
Can you hold your hand up?
So I cannot imagine asking the administrators to cut anymore. Like, they've been asked, what, 3 times this year already to cut budgets? I mean, I work in one of the schools. I cannot, our administrator has cut every single shred that there is. We wouldn't be able to operate the school. So I understand that it comes down to I don't want to have to close the school I work in. I don't want that, but I also don't understand how we could possibly run our school on any less. And I think that you're asking the administrators, who have already done an incredible job of trying to figure out how to meet the demands of the budget this year, to go back and cut more for like the 4th time. I understand where you're coming from, but I don't understand how that's realistic. I just don't. I don't understand how it's realistic for the rest of this year or for next year.
I don't think the rest of us understand how realistic it is either.
I mean, this, what you needed to do really was cut slowly over time. Every year, that population went down, but that hasn't happened. So now you have a situation where you're going to make some cuts potentially, and I'm not. You can't cut $1 million in a year; it would be impossible.
Right.
But that said, you got to cut at least half of that to make the district survive. Now, another option is the district doesn't survive. You become part of another district. That is something I think the Finance Advisory Board is probably going to look at with you as well, because it may not be possible to cut in the way that you need to all at once. Closing buildings, though, that usually does save quite a bit of money. Not $1 million, but it'll save, sometimes it's $300,000.
I mean, I'm not an administrator and I don't work in the budget. I live the reality of teaching every day, and I know that there are legalities to how many students are, how many grade levels a teacher can teach at a time. I know that in preschool, younger grade, you have to have a certain teacher adult to student ratio. I know that I know some things, but I don't know everything. But I do know that our administrators have already been asked to trim and trim and trim this year, and the budget that was passed doesn't even cover what's needed for next year. So before you vote on that motion, I'd like you to ask about how realistic that motion is in the first place. So that's what I'm doing.
I said only a couple people, but I see you standing up there and Jane has done that. So if you can have like a 1-minute conversation, that would be great.
I just want to say, as a resident of the town of Northfield, I struggle with the idea that the town of Northfield, I'm speaking only for the town of Northfield, would not have approved an increased budget. I think the town of Northfield would have. So I remember standing up and talking about how skeletal the budget was and how frustrated I was that the school committee chose not to meet the demands or to meet the request of Jean Bacon, and then chose to continue to talk about the schools in a way that you as representatives of these towns, that you just are choosing not to see the importance of encouraging actually increasing our taxes, because I really do think people would be willing to. I might be crazy, but I do believe that there is political will. My concern is, do people feel comfortable with this school committee making decisions about increasing the school budget? So I wrestle. Like, I have no problem. I think your idea is terrific to go back to the towns, but I also think, you're from Leiden, right? You don't want to go back to your town and say, let's increase the budget and have this school committee make decisions about it. So, right. So I guess I'm just, as a citizen, again, I might be wrong about Northfield, but I really do believe we would have passed a larger budget, and we missed an opportunity to do that. People in Northfield who are here, they could say I'm wrong. I don't think that's true. I think we are freaked out that this is going to happen and people are going to leave more and more.
I have a fast comment about town meetings and the school budget. Any resident of the town at the town meeting can make a recommendation to increase the school budget. It doesn't always have to come from the school committee. So if persons at town meetings feel that budget is insufficient, then they can make a motion at that meeting to increase the budget.
Jane, you had Can you make it short?
I can make it real short.
Thank you.
And in response to Jeannie, all 4 towns would have to do a proportionate amount in order for it to be effective. What I wanted to do was throw more cold water on your problems. Have you looked at the latest cherry sheet since the Senate Budget Committee? Well, you won't be happy. It's down districts, and for this district in particular. You might want to take a look at it when you're looking at yours.
All right, so there's a motion. I think.
Motion.
I think there's a motion from.
A second, Robin.
From Robin.
Second by Danielle.
Would you read that back?
To direct the Central Office of Administration to present budget cut recommendations, possibly by building, of up to $1 million to be delivered to the chair for a preview 24 hours before the next meeting.
I didn't hear the last part of that.
To be delivered to the chairperson for preview 24 hours before the next meeting.
Okay, there's a motion and a second. All those in favor of that motion of Robin's? Signify by saying, by raising your class. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And opposed?
I'm sorry, Pat, I don't even know what to say.
4, and 1 abstention. Which is a negative. So that's
5 and 5.
what do we do?
What is it?
You did, I didn't help you.
What are they there for?
All right, so the motion,
Four,
Robin's
four,
motion
four, and
had,
one.
yeah, isn't 1 a negative if it's abstention?
What is the vote?
Well, 5 in favor, 4 opposed, 1 abstained.
So
That
it passes.
So, it passed.
Yes.
Nobody but here, so.
Right.
All right.
So, is there any more discussion on that, or have we pretty well discussed it?
Can I make one comment?
You can make one
Okay,
comment.
make it quick. Russell said the Department of Revenue was gonna say that we didn't ask the towns for enough money. But I'd kinda like to go on record of saying the state is not giving us enough money.
Yes.
So, I mean, that is the crux of the problem.
It's easy to blame our towns, but if they're not getting the money from the state, how are we going to get it from the towns?
I mean,
But you're not getting it from the state either.
No,
That's my
no,
point.
that's what we just said. I think
No,
the towns aren't getting it, the schools aren't getting it. You know, it really is from
More
that
and
level.
more unfunded mandates and, you know,
That's true. But
I hear a but.
your local situation is your local situation. So if you have a deficit already and you don't ask for more money, you're just creating double the deficit. I mean, it's not double, but it actually is almost double. But
Pat, can I just clarify?
Yes.
The night we voted our budget, this committee tried to vote a budget with an additional $200,000 in it, and it failed.
Yep, it did. It was the, yes, it was. And then we tried a 50,000 and that failed.
You can't,
Yeah.
this discussion is great, but we can't change what has gone on before.
No, but it's.
We need to move forward with positive attitudes so that this is portrayed everywhere.
But it is a nice clarification that the committee did not fail, the vote failed. So, moving on about the discussion from the search committee and where we are on the superintendent search. Last night, we interviewed 3 candidates, 3 very good candidates. And next week, we interview 2 more. And we're hoping that at next Thursday's meeting, we will vote to hire an interim superintendent candidate. But right now, we don't have those 2 names to come, 2 or 1 name to come forward. We're not sure how many we'll interview until we have done those last 2. And the meeting will be held here and not in Leiden as we had planned to have, just because Leiden Elementary would not hold us if these many people shine up. So, and the vote on hiring a business manager, we have got what did we count, 9 applications last night?
Something like that.
And we're gonna have to address that also at our next meeting of the search committee. And it would be nice to have that position also voted on next Thursday. Jean?
Pat, so next week, are you gonna come with a recommendation for just one person for superintendent?
1 or 2, we're not sure yet.
Because because I would, I would love it if the committee narrowed it down to the 2 people they thought were the best. And then the rest of the whole
Exactly.
committee could
That's our
meet with
plan,
them.
but we haven't met with the final 2,
Okay.
so we don't know what is gonna happen.
All right, thank you.
Maybe
So-
Russell can clarify that, but according to the MASC,
Yeah,
to hire an interim superintendent, you don't have to follow the same process. We could bring one candidate if there was a clear.
I haven't seen that advisory, but you also have to look at what the Attorney General says as far as the open meeting
Yeah,
law.
this is just, a publication by the.
Yeah, that's MASC, but the problem is you also have the Attorney General's office, and they, according to the open meeting law, as far as preliminary screening committees and executive sessions, for what you can do in executive session versus open session, there's a specific process.
So can we?
That process, I don't believe, has anything in regard to interims versus permanent, so. I can look at what MASC put out, but.
Yeah,
The
well,
AG's
we'd like
office.
to know, so we're doing it correctly.
That's what we've been following. Jean, did you have something else?
No.
Okay.
I've said enough.
Yes, Jean.
Point of information, you want to hire these 2 people and you want them to come on board now?
I don't believe we want the superintendent position to start until the first of the July 1st. The business manager position, I believe would be nice to have a little bit of an overlap if that happens.
And where does that salary come from?
You can't do that.
We can't do that? All right. Unless we hire in-house.
I mean, you're already, according to the state, having a difficult time getting through this year. I don't know how you'd add another salary.
What about the fact that we want to make this position full-time, and it's only been put in the budget despite
Yeah.
my
Our protest,
protesting?
yeah. That's another thing that we were talking about earlier. Remember that we needed to, just as we're shuffling things around, we need to think about is that in the shuffle.
Can we?
You'd have to reduce some other area of the budget to increase what you're gonna pay a business manager and a superintendent.
Would that require a full committee vote?
You need
I
a
think
vote
any of those
to change, to move money from one line item to another, there's this committee vote.
Jim?
I'd like to make a motion that we adjourn.
All right, is there a second?
Second.
Second.
Second. Is there any discussion?
Do we have anything else?
No, that was the end of it.
Gail has a question.
Yes, Gail?
I just want to make a comment for myself, but I'm sure that my colleagues would agree with this. Recently, and for quite a while, many of the decisions that have been made have not included the administrative team. I understand that being an administrator is a tough job sometimes, and this certainly is one of them. You've directed us to do something. We will do it as a team, but know that we are picking up the mess.
I didn't hear what you said. You're
Picking up a mess.
Yeah. We understand.
I think we understand
We
that,
get that.
Gail, and thank you for that.
You get it.
Thank you.
All right, there's been a motion to adjourn. All those in favor?
Aye.
All right, we'll see you back here next week.
Yeah.
Well, if there's 2 candidates.